to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are decoding a wonderfully dense and really fascinating prophetic text, the Book of Micah. And hey, if you're wondering why a 2,700-year-old text matters to us right now, stick around. You're going to see exactly how its ancient warnings and its promises echo perfectly into our modern lives. We're about to unpack a profound journey that moves from a grand vision of the future right through the harsh realities of historical judgment and finally lands on a powerful message of ultimate hope. Let's dive in.
Hello, everyone. This is TN Inside. Let's begin by reading today's scripture passage from the book of Micah, chapter 4 to 7.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with peace in the last days, then look at a ruler from Bethlehem, witness God's lawsuit against Israel, go searching for ripe figs, and finally we'll wrap up with the shepherd of hope.
Section 1. Peace in the Last Days. A Utopian Vision.
Right in Micah chapter 4, the prophet sets the scene by envisioning the Lord's temple exalted above all others. And there's this really beautiful, almost startling dissonance to his promise. He brings up swords and spears, the absolute ultimate weapons of war and destruction. But the prophecy states that because all wars on earth will one day cease entirely, these very instruments of death are going to be melted down and transformed into plowshares and pruning hooks. Think about that for a second. It is a utopian promise of a time when the literal tools of destruction are repurposed into tools that sustain and nurture life.
Now, you might be asking, when exactly does this massive global disarmament actually happen? Well, it brilliantly illustrates how the vision of the last days unfolds progressively across three distinct eras. First up, it refers primarily to the historical return of the Israelites from the Babylonian exile. Second, it expands into the Messianic era. That's a time when God restores Israel and establishes his kingdom through his teachings. But that ultimate, flawless peace, where weapons are completely obsolete, that will be fully realized at the final stage, the second coming of the Messiah, bringing perfect peace in a new heavens and a new earth.
Section 2. A ruler from Bethlehem. The prophecy.
Before reaching that ultimate peace, Israel would first have to face some intense foreign invasions and humiliation. But look at how this prophetic timeline unfolds to bring hope. Imagine this. 720 years before the birth of Jesus, Micah prophesies that a ruler over Israel, someone whose origins are from ancient times, will emerge from the tiny, seemingly insignificant clan of Bethlehem in Judah. Fast forward to the 1st century AD, and we see Joseph and Mary traveling from Galilee straight to Bethlehem, directly fulfilling this ancient text. And looking ahead to the future, the ascended Jesus is prophesied to return and establish that final peace. It is just absolutely fascinating to see how a highly specific prophecy spans so many centuries to reach fulfillment.
While making these promises, the text specifically mentions Assyria. Now, Assyria was a truly terrifying ancient superpower, but Micah is using it here as a universal stand-in, a model representing God's ultimate enemies. The takeaway for us today? Honestly, no matter how overwhelming or intimidating the Assyrias of our own eras might seem, whether that's corrupt systems, global crises, or even personal battles, God promises ultimate protection for his chosen people through the Messiah.
Section 3. God's lawsuit against Israel, the courtroom drama.
We are now stepping into a literal, dramatic courtroom scene in Micah chapter 6. God is actually calling the hills themselves as witnesses against his own disobedient people. Just look at the staggering contrast of the prosecution's case here. On one hand, you have God's history of loving protection. He delivered the people from Egypt, sent leaders to guide them, and protected them all the way to the Promised Land. But how does Israel respond to that grace? They are out there using dishonest scales in the marketplace, the wealthy are full of violence and lies, and the entire society is engaging in detestable idolatry. It's a remarkably stark picture of profound societal corruption.
To really drive home just how bad things had gotten, God specifically rebukes Judah for following the practices of Omri and Ahab. Now, these were the absolute most corrupt and wicked dynasties of the northern kingdom. They were totally infamous for exploiting the poor. Think of King Ahab, who literally used false witnesses to murder Naboth just so he could steal his vineyard. Micah is referencing this specific, horrific history to show that the exact same infection of greed and cruelty had now completely taken over the society of Judah.
Realizing they're in serious trouble, the people agonize over what they can possibly sacrifice to appease God. But God's response just cuts right through all that empty ritual. Quote, "Act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with the Lord."
I want to pause here and just let this powerful, incredibly famous verse resonate. It brilliantly illustrates that God isn't looking for the most expensive, precious religious sacrifices. What he truly desires is right living, social fairness, and a genuinely humble heart.
Section 4. Searching for ripe figs. The prophet's lament.
Moving into chapter 7, Micah essentially becomes an emotional watchman looking out over a completely ruined society. And he uses this incredibly vivid agricultural metaphor to express his heartbreak. He says he is desperately searching for the first ripe figs of June. Those precious, plump, delicious early figs. They symbolize the godly, righteous people he hopes to find. But all he finds are thorns and briars, sharp, painful, utterly useless weeds that represent a totally corrupt and wicked society. To his absolute despair, there is not a single righteous person left. And this wickedness just spirals into an absolute societal collapse. It starts right at the top, with rulers engaging in evil and judges literally being bought off with bribes. Power-hungry leaders are serving no one but themselves, but then it seeps down into everyday life, resulting in a total breakdown of trust between neighbors. It gets so incredibly bad that Micah warns a man's worst enemies are the members of his own household. The rot has literally torn apart the very fabric of society, down to the family unit.
Because the corruption is so total, Micah essentially blows the warning horn. The day of the watchman has come. Remember, the prophets were the watchmen of Israel, continuously warning the people of impending doom. Well, time is officially up. The long-worn day of God's judgment, punishment, and the collapse of the corrupt city has finally, inevitably arrived.
Section 5. The Shepherd of Hope, a promise of restoration. But you see, the book of Micah does not just leave us sitting in the ashes. Micah identifies closely with fallen Jerusalem, but he maintains this enduring hope that the city will rise again from the ruins, moving from darkness back into the light. He actually prays for God to become a shepherd to his people once more, specifically asking him to feed his flock in Bashan and Gilead. Why there? Because those regions east of the Jordan River were famous for their exceptionally rich pastures and fat livestock. By using this specific geographic imagery, Micah is symbolizing abundant provision, absolute safety, and the loving, hands-on care of a truly dedicated shepherd. Looking at both the strict justice and the absolutely incredible mercy of God, Micah is just left in total awe. He asks, "Who is a God like you?" He's reflecting on a God who doesn't just issue heavy judgments, but who ultimately forgives sins and remains completely faithful to the ancient promises of steadfast love made to Abraham and Jacob. Even when the people failed entirely, God's faithfulness and his loving kindness endured. As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a really provocative thought to chew on. If the prophet Micah were standing as a watchman today, looking over our modern society, would he find the ripe figs he was searching for? Does our world actually reflect the justice, the mercy, and the humility that God so clearly desires? It's a challenging question for sure, but an essential one. Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating text with me. Keep reflecting on these ideas, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.